Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Looks like people are still coming in. Right now we're at, jumping up to about 90 people now. So we'll give maybe one more minute as people are still joining. But feel free, you can look in the Q&A button on the top of your Microsoft Teams. There's a question posted by my colleague Jing. You can let us know your name and where you're tuning in from today and what brings you here. And we'll get started in just another moment. Looks like a lot of people are joining right now. Great, and letting everyone know this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to access it later. And we just started the recording a moment ago. Okay, we'll get started. I think people are still trickling in, but we can kick it off here. So just want to thank you all very much for being here. On behalf of the WHO GIS Center for Health, we welcome you to one of our Knowledge Series webinars. So of the many things we do at the GIS Center is we do lots of trainings on geospatial and GIS tools, and we also host these Knowledge Series webinars where we have these discussions on geospatial topics, talk about geospatial data, and as it applies to health and the humanitarian field. So we have 4 great guest speakers here today. I want to thank them for joining us and participating in this conversation. And we'll introduce them in a moment. But first, let's go through a few logistics on how this event will work. And then I'll hand it over to Ravi Shankar, who's the director of our GIS Center. So first, we have about 90 minutes together today, and we'll finish around 5:30 p.m. CET. I know people are joining from all over the world, so whatever time that is in your time zone. And in a moment, I'll have Ravi give a welcome and talk about our GIS Center at the World Health Organization. And then I'll introduce our 4 awesome panelists for the day, and each of them will give a short presentation and with some slides on their work in geospatial open data. Then we'll have a conversation with the panelists and ask a few questions and talk about this growing and important topic of what data is open and how to utilize that data in the humanitarian field. And then finally, we'll open it up with some questions from the audience. And we encourage you to submit your questions in that Q&A button at the top of your screen. So because of this webinar style, we won't be using the chat, but please do use that Q&A button to submit questions. Our team will check those questions out, and you're able to upvote and like questions that you would like to see our panelists answered. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can at the end. And throughout the webinar, because of a lot of people, we have around almost 150 people tuned in right now. So thank you everyone for being here. You can interact with us. Feel free to use that reaction button at the top of your Teams window, and you can show some love to the panelists when they say something you like or agree with or are excited about. So there we go. Inga, thank you for the heart. Great. And yeah, the webinar is recorded, and we've started that. Great. On that note, I'll hand it over to Ravi to introduce our GIS Center team.
Thanks, Cameron. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, once again for joining with us today. I welcome you to the GIS Knowledge Series webinar on Open Data for Global Health. My name is Ravi Shankar. I'm the head of the GIS Center at the headquarters in Geneva, and it's a big honor to open this panel discussion hosted by our center. The GIS Center for Health, if you're not aware, if you're listening for the first time, is dedicated in connecting maps, apps, data, and people to support informed public health decision making. Through our work in advocacy, service provision, and capacity development, we aim to enable countries to harness the power of geospatial data, effectively driving impactful health interventions on the ground. In today's interconnected world, open data has become an indispensable resource for global health. Health challenges across borders, and addressing these demands needs transparency, interoperability, and collaboration across sectors and regions. Open data provides a perfect foundation for collaboration, allowing us to make evidence-based, timely decisions that benefit communities at both local level and the global level. As we dive into the session, I encourage you to think about opportunities and challenges we face in expanding open data access and utility. How can we work together to ensure open data continues to evolve as a tool for resilience, for equity, and impact and making an impact in global health? Once again, thanks for joining with us. Let's get started. Can we go to the next slide? I just wanted to mention about the team behind it. I closely saw the work which was happening to make this event happen. And this is the team behind it, which is based in 20 different countries, in 10 different time zones, and making a difference for the center, supporting round the clock. Back to you, Cameron. Thanks.
Thank you, Ravi. Next, let's introduce our 4 guest speakers for the day. And nice, it looks like they're all highlighted here on our team's webinar. So this is the order of the presentations as well, but I'll introduce all 4 of our guest speakers and then we'll go into the presentations. So we have Nama Buddhathoki. Nama is joining us representing the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team known as HOT. He's the regional director of HOT's Asia Pacific Hub. So thank you, Nama, for being here. We also have Mark Priolu. Mark is the executive director of Overture Maps Foundation, a fairly new foundation doing really exciting, cool things in open data for geospatial. Andy Tatum, thanks for being here. Andy's a professor at University of Southampton, and he's the founder and director of WorldPop. And fourth, we have Majed Abukubi. Majed is Chief of Field Information Services at UN OCHA. So once again, thank you all 4, and let's hand it over to Nama to go through some slides here. Nama?
Cam, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. First of all, let me thank Cam and the whole WHO team for organizing this event. I think this is very timely and important topic, I guess. What I want to do is quickly introduce to those of you who haven't got a chance to work in OpenStreetMap as one of the most important source of open data. So can you go to the next slide? So in the simplest form, OpenStreetMap is just a website. But this website is different than many other websites that we use on an everyday basis. Many other websites do not allow you to write your content. You can only read. But this website allows you to read the information, but also write it, meaning this is open. So because this is open, because you can write, you can participate and contribute. And that's very important. This project was started in 2004, about 20 years ago, when we had very limited source of open data. The map data was not really available at that time. Even if it was available, people did not have access. So the idea behind the project is that every human knows something about their community. They have knowledge through living there or through visiting. And just imagine if we do have a platform where these people can contribute their local knowledge, and then we can certainly map the world collectively together. That was the idea, and I think the idea was profound. And when we come to 2024 now, this has really grown. So, I would say this is obviously one of the largest open map data projects, if not the largest one. We do have more than 10, 11 million people, a community of 11 million people from all over the world, who have never met each other. There is no central direction coming from anybody. They're still coming together to work in a single project is something unbelievable. Is remarkable. So it's a massive database. It has already more than 9 billion nodes. By the way, nodes, each node is a fundamental geometry that makes map, whether this is health facility or road network or a village boundary. And as you can see, there's a massive edit. So every day there are more than 4 million edits, meaning people either put new information, they map something new, or they improve data. So that tells you the scale of the project. In many parts of the world, this is sort of a default map because there are no other sources of map data. And it has applications in a wide range of areas. It's just limited by our imagination. Humanitarian, aid, humanitarian sector is one of the heavy user of this map data. People also use OpenStreetMap for location-based services, logistics, market analysis, infrastructure planning, so on and so forth. Can you go to the next slide, Cam? To give you a sense of what I'm talking about, let's look at this. Cam, you need to click on this here. So at this moment, at this very moment, look at what's happened. Somebody's mapping Finland. Somebody from France. This is the beauty, and I love it. There are people mapping their communities, contributing data, improving data, and that's actually the core of this project. People from all in different parts of the world contributing what they can. So this is truly participatory. Every piece of information we have in this database is free for download, use. The only thing is that you need to attribute to OpenStreetMap. So what I would like to emphasize is that this project has, inspired a lot of other things. It's not only data, it's not only mapping. It has inspired institutions, it has inspired groups. It has shown that, it's possible, we can work together, no matter where we live. This is truly amazing. So, and then, there are different levels of mapping. In some part of the world, nothing exists on the map. Some other part heavily mapped already, but generally we start with road network, building footprints, and then we begin to put place names, and then people begin to put different facilities or critical infrastructure in their community, health facilities or schools or even shops, whatever people think is important for them. So people have freedom to map what they think is most important for them and for their community. Again, that's very different than the proprietary maps or traditional mapping where somebody defines what needs to be mapped versus I define what is important for me. And then you can also get a lot of deep information, like if there's health facilities, what kind of facilities this, what is opening hour, whether it has X-ray facilities or ICUs, kinds of things. So yeah, we can keep on going, adding more details in the map. Next, please. So my organization, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, was established in 2010, basically to provide maps and to people who are at the forefront of disaster response or humanitarian aid. And recently, in 2020, actually, end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, we established 4 different regional hubs because we learned that it's so important to be close to people, place, and problems. So through the regional hubs, we can actually get closer to communities, and we can do more relevant work. And obviously, HOT takes humanitarian angle in mapping the OpenStreetMap. So so we provide technology, we provide training, we help develop capacity. We also provide the platforms for communities, people from different regions to talk to each other, to build network, so that we can take a better collective action. So HOT keeps on contributing to expand the coverage of the map, improve the quality of the data, and also add depth of the data. So we not only map, by the way, HOT also works very, very closely with humanitarian organizations, local governments, and other partners to help them, analyze data, interpret data, and then so that they can use data in their decision-making processes. So yeah, can you go to the next slide? So in 2021, we set an ambitious goal. By 2025, we want to map an area where 1 billion people live. And HOT's priority is low resource constraint, areas. So we prioritize areas that is vulnerable to natural disasters and changing climate, and also the areas suffers from multidimensional poverty. So these are generally the areas that's kind of neglected in mapping. There's a lot of mapping in big cities where there are businesses, where there are more activities. But HOT's focus is rural areas, vulnerable communities, to save lives of the people, so that humanitarian actors can have access to map data information quickly in times of crisis. So yeah, we're pretty close to our goal. I invite you to join this movement. I call it a silent movement. It's a global movement, and we need more people to map areas that are not mapped yet. So with that, Cam, over to you.
Thank you, Nama. And I think that was a great start to our conversation. Just to introduce for the participants, I think many of you are very familiar with OpenStreetMap, but others, if that's a new thing, it's also a great entry point to people getting into GIS and starting to interact with spatial data. And so for the rest of this conversation, we'll probably refer to OpenStreetMap many times, and maybe by saying OSM. And I think it's a very nice segue to go to our next guest speaker, Mark, who works in that OSM space quite a bit, and as well as other spaces with Overture Maps Foundation. So handing it over to you now, Mark.
Thanks, Cam and Nama, and it's actually really appropriate to go right after OSM, because OSM is a really venerable product. Anyone who's worked in open map data has, I'm sure, touched OSM and HOT in some way. Overture is relatively new. We're coming up on 2 years. And we're a foundation aimed at creating a map ecosystem around open data. And in some ways, one of the things I think that's really key to this is that maps aren't a single set thing. Maps depend on the application, and they're layers of data where people bring in the data that really makes their maps customized or applicable to their use. And so the map that you would expect to be used in disaster relief or climate issues would not be the same map you would expect to go find a hot chocolate. And so map are these layers, and it really is around an ecosystem. And one of the things that Overture is working hard to do is build this ecosystem, which allows open data to be a backbone that all these other maps can be built on. And so that's one of the key things. Overture is a foundation started under the Linux Foundation. We're about 2 years old. And if I were to look at the components of Overture, and maybe this will help me connect it to Nama's conversation, our focus is really on building map data for people who are using that map data in applications or in analysis. And so our real focus is on how to make the map available and possible for those people to use. And so there are really 3 things in that. One is we'll use the best sources of open map data, and the number 1 on the list is crowdsourced. We use OSM quite a bit. In fact, I think a little hard to measure, but around 60% of the data in our data sets come from various OSM sources. And so that's a huge source and has been just for years a massive source of data. But we also use government data, and more governments are making open data available and out there. And some of that is very good data. And so we need to bring that in and use it. And increasingly, what we're seeing is data generated by AI, either AI and machine learning applied to imagery or based on sensors. And I think one of the key things is we see map data increasingly being built not by survey, but by sensors with AI applied to it. And so one of the things is we use various sources of open map data to create a comprehensive, as complete a map as we can. One of the things is some private enterprise also will make their data open. And I think that's a tribute to some of the momentum that open data has in the space where companies will make some of their data open and allow us to use it. So the first one is to use all sources of open map data. The second one is to do validation and quality control on it. A lot of our teams are working on things like conflation and deduplication and data validation. We spend a lot of time trying to do that. If you've been in maps, you know no maps are perfect. It's a never-ending task, but that's a big part of it is adding that validation and quality control. And then the third thing, which is really aimed at the users of data, is to add a data schema. So the data comes out in a certain order, a certain format, which application developers know how to use. And then the other part, and we'll talk a little bit more through the hour, I think, is a way of attaching other data to it. And the point I'd make there is open data is a great layer, but very often in the analysis or the application, the data attached to that data is equally important. And so we have something called the Global Entity Reference System, or GIRS, and that's a way of attaching data. And I think that's a really key concept. That data that's attached can be open, but very often it's private or proprietary. But it is important to be able to attach data. Cam, if you go to the next slide. Here's just an example. This is an area near San Diego, California, and the blue is OSM. The red is OSM. The blue is community maps from Esri. So those are probably from the city. And then in the lower part, you see some sort of greenish and orangish squares. Those are from AI sources from Google and Microsoft. And so what you see in here is that by blending different sources of map data, you get a much higher coverage. And one of the things we've seen, for instance, is in some areas, particularly urban areas, buildings are well mapped, but other areas, they're not well mapped. And the ability to bring in AI generated data really impacts our ability to provide coverage. And I think we'll talk a little more about that. Next slide, please, Cameron. Right now, we're putting out 6 data themes: transportation, which is a road network; places, which is places of business; divisions, which is admin boundaries for countries and sub-country level; buildings, we have 2.3 million building footprints worldwide, including really good coverage in the global south. Addresses, we're just starting. It's a fairly new project that's actually up over 300 million now. And then base, which is context, land, and water. So those are the data sets we're putting out. And last slide, we were started, sorry, Cam, if you go to the next slide. We were started by 4 companies 2 years ago. We've now grown to about 35 companies and organizations, including HOT. And so we're really happy to have HOT. The thing I'd mention is the work we do is very much driven by the interests of our members. And so, with HOT coming in, we are building a focus or an emphasis on some of the humanitarian and climate applications, whereas some of these companies you would envision are more interested in some of the commercial applications. So we are driven by the members. So hope to talk more about that. And back to you, Ken.
Thank you, Mark. Great. And as we transition to our next speaker, Andy, I think Mark touched on a lot of things, including AI and machine learning derived data using sensors, and also mapping Overture helping fill in gaps of places that don't have a lot of map data. And I think Andy can speak a lot to that with his World Pop organization. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, this is again another good setup because at WorldPop we're a user of Overture data and OSM data, and we focus on populations. So go to the next slide. We're maybe an outlier here. We're within a university. We're at heart a research group, but also produce open data sets. So we're mapping population counts, characteristics, and mobility patterns, and their use in areas such as sensor support, disaster response, epidemiology. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we're in the humanitarian space, I guess we're trying to answer questions like this. What is the denominator when we see an outbreak? Do we have the workforce to be able to address it? Where is that target demographic group we're trying to reach? How to target surveillance and campaigns? If we're going to deliver vaccines, how to deliver those? Can we reach all of those children under 5? And then if there's some kind of disaster, how many people are affected? Where should we deliver aid? So if we go to the next slide. The challenges that we face in trying to answer those questions are around the population data is that in many countries that data can be outdated, it can be incomplete, we can have inaccuracies in the population data, and the data that is available can often be at coarse resolution. If we go to the next slide, what we're aiming for in WorldPop is this kind of output. We're trying to estimate for each grid square of approximately 100 by 100 meters how many people there are living in those grid squares. It's a difficult thing to do, but if we can get to at least estimates that are relatively reliable, on the next slide we can see the value of having those gridded data sets is that flexibility. So we have the ability to aggregate to health units, administrative units that decisions are often made at, to be able to sum up those grid cells to get population estimates within settlements, and then to be able to link them with other types of data. So estimating numbers of people within 5 kilometers of a health facility, for instance. And the next slide. And of course, there are a whole range of data sets that can help us do that. This is just one of those data sets that were recently released from Google of open buildings, but of course there's a whole huge range that we've just heard about, particularly from in Overture. And the next slide, please. The thing is that buildings on their own don't tell us completely about population. We need to think about the other things as build up a picture of the landscape as best as we can. So what we're aiming to do, as you see on the right, is build up a set of layers, and some of those come from OpenStreetMap, some of those come from Overture, but we're also processing those ourselves to try and identify patterns in those buildings, to identify different types of neighborhoods, where some types of neighborhoods may have higher population densities. We're trying to identify whether buildings are residential or non-residential. Bringing in data sets on building damage can help us understand which buildings are likely to be occupied, land use, land cover, and then where possible bringing in data on mobility patterns as well to try and quantify changing dynamics that may happen. So if you just go to the next slide, you'll see it more often looks like this in terms of a stack of geospatial data sets, maybe in some cases about 100 of those different layers. And then we use those to try and produce those gridded population estimates. That can either be the situation, this top down, where we are taking an aggregate count of people that we trust, and we are disaggregating those from the admin unit counts to grid square scales. So producing a more flexible source of data, or in the situation where we don't have data that we trust, but we do have maybe small samples from household surveys, from field campaigns, we can use those data as training data for statistical models to fill in the gaps and estimate those grid square scales. Next slide, please. And we do this where possible with co-development with those decision makers. So this really helps us understand what are the needs, what are the data that exist to meet those needs, what skills exist within statistics offices or ministries of health or UN agencies to design solutions, and then to co-develop those outputs, ideally make them open and develop training plans and work together to produce those. And if we go on the next slide, I'll give a few examples of where we've done this. And this is just to acknowledge those countries around the world where we've undertaken this kind of engagement, co-developing population data sets together. And on the next slide, you'll see there's a link there, and many of those data sets I'm going to talk about you can find on our open population repository, where those are co-authored, co-developed with either a UN agency or a government. So just some quick examples of this. This may be situations like Nigeria, last census 2006, DRC, last census 1984. The projections are highly uncertain, and so we're working here with field teams to collect new enumeration data from small areas that form training data to be able to then predict using those geospatial layers into the unsampled areas. And you see on the next slide, this produces these high resolution gridded estimates, and these have then formed the basis of vaccination campaigns in both of these countries. You go to the next slide, when they're integrated with things like place names, boundaries, roads, to be able to define microplans. The next slide gives an example of doing this in a particularly a humanitarian situation. So population estimation survey was carried out by the government in UNFPA to provide sampled data again in a situation where South Sudan has not had its own census. The last census was 2008, and a lot of displacement has happened. So more recent estimates were used to then train these models. Next slide, please, and produce those estimates integrated with data on refugee camp locations. And then on the next slide, you'll see those are then went through Parliament, were accepted as the official numbers that you'll find as the common operational data sets, but also used as a sample frame for collecting new data on vulnerabilities, COVID-19. Next slide, you have an example of the actual use of health campaign data itself. So the potential is there to make use of data. In this case, Papua New Guinea, last census was 2010. But health campaign data from BedNet distributions was collected and geolocated, and this is valuable training data for then using that to produce population estimates again. You see on the next slide, these are now the numbers that you'll find on the Statistics Office website, as well as openly available at those links. So on the next slide, we have the situation, humanitarian settings, where there's a need for rapid population estimates, and often common operational data sets on population statistics are produced, but these are often at aggregate scales because they are based on demographic projections from coarse data that's available. Here we work with those data providers to undertake this top-down disaggregation, and you'll see from the next slide, this enabled rapid production of data sets for Ukraine, for Yemen, that could then be integrated with things like travel times to health facilities because of that gridded nature and the open data. So on the next slide, just to highlight that many of the data sets that you probably use if you're using WorldPop data also come from this kinds of global gridded data sets where we're trying to harmonize across all countries, across time periods. So an assembly of census data, disaggregating those on the next slide to grid square scales using that top-down approach. And you'll see on the next slide, this is the kind of data that's age and sex structured that is, again, openly available and available on these different portals, the UNFPA portal, Living Atlas at Esri. So I think the final slides just to highlight, yes, those data sets are all, there's 44,000 of them available, different formats on our portal. And because of that open nature, you'll see on the next slide, we've seen various uses of these types of data for UNISAT, producing rapid estimates. They're in the DHIS2 system for health system denominators, health metrics, and then estimating exposure to things like air pollution and conflict. So just to conclude, I think that, there's traditional data sources. These should not be seen as a replacement, but we know that population data from census surveys can be incomplete, outdated, and often not openly available and easily accessible. So these new open geospatial data sources can help us to produce, fill gaps, produce new estimates, but we do also need to understand limitations, ideally measure uncertainties in those outputs. And if we're going to see those used, then local ownership, partnership, co-development is pretty vital. So I will finish there. The next slide, just to highlight that there are training materials, and hopefully we can share these slides afterwards so people can access those training materials and links if you're interested in these approaches yourself. So
Certainly.
Next slide also has a couple of links. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I just want to remind all of our participants, feel free to submit your questions in that Q&A. And as the panelists are going through their slides, we can look through those questions, and then at the end we'll have time to answer them. And thanks, Andy. We at the GIS Center use World Pop data on a daily basis. It's one of our key sources. So it's nice to hear more background about the project and hear it from you yourself. Great. So our fourth speaker will be Majed, and I think we have a nice story we're telling here. We're started with Hot OSM, which is a very general map of the world, community source data. Overture is putting different data sets together, OSM and others, to create this kind of comprehensive data in their different themes. Now, World Pop is applying, doing more analysis to create these population estimates. And now we'll hear from Majed, who has a lot more experience implementing data on the ground and how it's applied in his work in UN OCHA. So over to you, Majed. Oh, you're muted there.
Yeah.
There we go.
Thanks, Kim,
Nice.
and thanks for giving me the opportunity to present what we do in OCHA at the humanitarian field. We are consumers to the world population and the OpenStreet map, plus many other data sets. So please, next slide. So the common operational data set, it is open in a way, but it's not an open source. It is OCHA is compiling the data, administrative data from the countries where we operate, but we do it not only in those 27 emergencies or humanitarian crises. We do it, I think, for at least 164 countries. Because we don't anticipate where a natural disaster will happen. So we, at the moment, work in 27 countries, but as a preparedness measure, we have a compilation of 164 countries. So in simple terms, the common operational data sets, it's really very simple. It is the administrative boundaries of countries from, it could be 3 levels, 4 levels, 5 levels, depending on the country. We basically operate with the member states, the statistical office, or the geographic centers at those countries to get the data. And in many cases where we can't get the data because they want us to buy the data set, and we don't buy the data, we would like to get it free. So, and we have the consent from them to share it and make it accessible to the rest of the world. The idea came because this is the common denominator. This is the binary language. This is the foundation for our humanitarian work in the crisis. We need those administrative boundaries to allow us to communicate with the rest of the clusters. So if health is doing projects and programming, we want to know where those programs are implemented at the smallest geographical element. So those common denominator geographical data allow us to identify the needs, and identify where we are responding. Without those data sets, we will not be able to cooperate and create those relational database, whether those are for geographic or thematic data analysis. So to allow us and to enable us to do geographical and temporal analysis, we need those common data sets. Next slide, please. So there is different types of common operational data sets. The first one is the core, which is the admin boundaries with its 3-4 levels. The population statistics. It's really very important to have the population statistics, and those could be aggregated by gender, by age, by different groups of people. The humanitarian profile, I'll speak on it in a minute. On parallel to this, we have the country-specific or the foundational data sets. Those are similar to what have been communicated in the previous slides. The topography, the rivers, the roads, the internally displaced centers, the health facilities, the educational facilities, and all of those data sets are valid during the crisis. And for us, the OpenStreetMap is one of the sources, especially whenever we have a natural disaster where we don't have a compilation of data. So sometimes we rely on the official ministerial data sets, the Ministry of Health, but in cases where we don't have the data, we rely on OpenStreetMap. Next. Let me very quickly, this is, the beauty or the strength of the data when we have a disaggregation about the affected people, whether those are refugees living with host families, the demographic breakdowns by age, by gender, the vulnerability indicators are those who are the most vulnerable among those groups of people, and the geographical distribution and the severity. And the strength of the data will be much more impactful when you know the affected people, their gender, where they are concentrated, and the severity of their situation. Next slide, please. Next, let's skip this. We're going to share this presentation. Those are the countries with common operational data sets. It has a lot of metadata and the status and the completeness of the administrative data. Next slide, you can have all those data sets from the data.humanitariandata.org /COD. Basically, it's the humanitarian data exchange. On the data center, you go there, you can download the data in different formats, whether it's Excel, geospatial, JSON file. You have different format to download the data. Next slide. This is how the administrative data look from level 1, the governorate level, district, sub-district, neighborhoods, and in many cases we have the settlements location. Next slide, please. One important note about the previous slide, there is a unique identifier for each and every single location, which would allow us as UN organization and humanitarian organization to exchange the data. This is the only way we can do one-to-one or one-to-many spatial join, which allow us to do multi-sectoral needs analysis. I want to speak a little bit about a practical example from Gaza on how we use the administrative or the COD in combination with other data sets. So this is Gaza Strip. As you can see, we are combining the administrative boundaries with more operational data on the crossing status, on the Israeli military installations, checkpoints, and the road status from, usually we get this from the Google Maps. And we have the IDP designated area, IDP shelter, medical center, water points. And I think the value of the GIS and our ability to analyze and inform decision makers how to operate based on visual interpretation, because in this case, we show anything in light red is where our movement is controlled, and it needs identification from the Israelis whether to move from X to Y. However, most of the 2.3 million people were allowed to stay in the white area on the coastal zone. They call it the humanitarian area. Next slide, please. This is a very true example on how we combine administrative data with satellite imageries. Next slide. Go next. Here we show the neighborhoods. Next slide, please. And here we put the latest satellite imageries from UNOSAT, shows the level of destruction. On top of that, we have the Israeli, they call it grid system created for the war, because the evacuation system were based on those small areas, and we use the word population to estimate how many people are living within those evacuations. So the Israeli government would say, please, 1808, 1787, they need to evacuate in a couple of hours. And so we have to communicate with those people, make sure they are displaced. And based on that, we can quantify how many people are living with those grid, and we use the population grid to estimate those population figures. On top of that, can you go next slide? We show where are the IDP camps, where are the hospitals. With the level of destruction, we can tell whether those people can move anywhere. To be honest with you, most of the 70 to 80% of Gaza is flattened to the ground. There is no safe haven at this stage, but nevertheless, we have used the art of GIS in combination with administrative data and other data sets to tell a story about the humanitarian situation on the ground. Next slide, please. This is another example where we did, planning for medical supply and medical evacuation from the south all the way to Shifa. This is part of our negotiation with the Israeli Defense Force, which route we use, where are the rubble, where are the destruction, and we have to use OpenStreetMap data plus Google data plus the network to identify the safest route. Next slide, please. This is just showing the Shifa hospital parameter. Go next. This is another practical example on, at the beginning of the crisis, we relied on OpenStreetMap to identify the health facilities. However, we had to combine it with official data from the Ministry of Health on, go next, please, and showing the different types of health facilities and the non-functioning. So those 248 health facilities between hospitals, medical points, primary healthcare, by geography, by administrative boundary, by the operational organization on the ground who are administering those. And those represent more than 50 to 60% of the health facilities, because most of the health facilities, they are located in the northern part of Gaza, the two northern governorate. Like 60 to 70% of the health capacity and infrastructure is located to the north. And after 1 month, almost 80 to 90%, so 1.7 to 1.9 people have moved, were displaced to the southern part. This has put a huge strain and a pressure on the health facilities in the south, and help us to make informed decision on where to position our health facilities and health subsidy. Over. I think that's it on my slides. If there is any question, I will be more than happy to answer those. This is just a practical example on how we use OpenStreetMap plus other geographical data to tell a story about the humanitarian situation and response planning. Over.
Great. Thank you, Majid. Thank you very much. And thank you all four of you for your presentations. I think at this point now I can stop sharing the screen and we can open it up for a conversation between us. I have a few questions planned, and I see there's some questions coming in from the audience, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. But I think first, maybe we can start with this is, I think when our team at the GIS Center makes map products, when we do analysis and make some products, our end goal, well, I think what is cool about maps is sometimes they can tell you an answer, right? Like they can very clearly show something definitive, but also many times they just help facilitate a conversation, right? They don't tell you exactly this is the answer, but they facilitate a conversation. So a lot of our map products are helping to facilitate a conversation, and hopefully they're informing decision makers on how to make good decisions. So we've heard some examples. Andy shared some nice examples of how WorldPop is implemented, and Majid shared examples of OCHA on the ground in Gaza, for example. But I'd like to open it up and just, in general, how can open data continue to be utilized and be better utilized to connect data to make good decisions to the decision makers, whether they're on the ground or in an office boardroom, on policies or emergency response on the ground. What are some thoughts or examples of how to connect this data to good decisions? And I can call on someone, or does anybody panelists have something right away they want to share? Majid, I guess we can go back to you and go back. Do you have any thoughts or advice for us on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, how we do it in OCHA is usually the requests come from the field. You know, we rely on user experience to tell a story, and whenever we have a request for how many people were, you know, will be impacted with this evacuation order, we draw a map, but also we provide some statistics on the impact in terms of how many people, whether there is critical life-saving facilities within the parameters of the evacuated area. I'm just giving you an example. And where are the resources? Because in many cases, they will ask people to move to another location. And we usually do, you know, help, you know, coordinate with the reporting officer to tell a story, to go in a publication, and to the advocacy team to communicate how bad is the situation on the ground. So basically, you need to speak to other people in your team, and even with the other clusters, whether it is the health or education or protection cluster, to tell a story and make sure that you disseminate the information to the right audience. So you don't work on your own as a mapper. Think together how you want to articulate your info products or your end product. Over.
Thank you, Majid. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, great question. And I think, you know, you can kind of break down, if the goal of map data and maps is to tell a story or perform an analysis, there are a couple different pieces to that. And one is having the data. And, you know, there's good news and bad news there, right? I mean, I think the good news is today we have more data than we've ever had. And yet the more data we have, the more data we want. The more, you know, we get to the edge of it and we want either more recent data or more granular data or some different type of data. And, you know, I think that's where this move towards open data is great, because you get that data, you're able to use it. But I think the other important part, and Majid sort of touched on this as well, is that data needs to be put together, and assembling that data, deduplicating it, and attaching it unambiguously to the map in the way you want is really important. And I think that's where the importance of these these identifiers, these stable identifiers that allow you to take whatever data from many sources and attach it unambiguously is really important. We were talking to some people who build maps, and they spend about twice as much time conflating data as they do just collecting data, and so that becomes a huge thing. And one of the things that our feeling is if we can kind of agree on that, there are many different ways of doing that, but if we can agree on some common ways of doing it, then that process goes quicker. And very often in humanitarian issues, speed is important. You need to build this analysis quickly. So I think that part, besides the data, it's access to the data. The data is in formats where it can be used, and you can do the combinations of data, the spatial joins of the data quickly. The only other thing I would say is we think of maps as ways of telling stories, and that's very true if we're telling stories to humans, but more and more what we're seeing is that computers are doing the analysis. And so there may never be a visual representation, but there may be a need to do these spatial joins, create analysis, and do that completely outside of a visual map. And I think that's where these stable identifiers become super important.
Thank you, Mark. Andy, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I would, I guess, echo what Mark and Majid just said. I mean, I think in WorldPop, we 10 years ago, we were a small research group and just doing things we thought was cool and putting data out there and hoping people would use it. And to an extent, people were using it, but it's only really particularly with population data, which can be so sensitive, where the being driven by that end user. I mean, as Mark says, there are many different types of maps for different purposes and different types of data sets for different purposes. And only when we started engaging with humanitarian agencies, with national statistics offices, ministries of health, did we fully understand the needs and how these data were going to be used, and realized that there needed to be this engagement and co-development. If a Ministry of Health is going to have to argue to the public and to their bosses why they are using this type of geospatial data rather than their traditional approach of taking a census that's 20 years old and doing a straight line projection, then they're going to need to understand the process, the data that went in, and be able to argue and defend that data. So that's, again, just to echo what Majid said, I think that engaging with those end users is the most important part we found, I think, in actually seeing that adoption and use of these types of new data. And it takes some bravery as well from those statistics offices and ministries of health to jump into something new that often they haven't been exposed to before, and to drive that through against all the traditional approaches.
Great, thank you, Andy. And it's something I think about in map products I make, especially our team is mostly remote, scattered all over the world. And when we submit a map product, we don't always know who will be reading it, when they'll be reading it, or what the situation is that they'll be using it in. Nalma, I want to make sure if you have anything to add, you have a chance to right here.
Yes, sure. I think what other colleagues said makes accomplish in a perfect sense. One of the things I would emphasize in line with what Andrew said is, that's really the most critical part. So foresting is extremely difficult to understand accurately, what the users are looking for, particularly in crisis situation, because the situation evolves. If there might be some request that's straightforward, clear, but a lot of other things is very complex. My experience tells that it also depends upon the society organizations. There is a culture. Some organizations, some people, they rely heavily on data analysis, data interpretation. Others also rely more on intuition or personal experience. That's the fact, actually. So this is not sort of a one-size-fits-all kinds of thing. we really need to understand the context. That context, that piece is the most difficult task. I would say, from my experience, in many cases, accessing data or producing some data product is relatively easy. I'm not saying that's easy as that's, but we have made quite a bit of progress here. But what we need to do more is exactly in the question, how can we bring it to the hands of those people who will actually be using, making decisions, serving people, saving lives. There is quite a bit of work that we need to do.
You
Sorry,
are
I was
muted.
Okay, thank you, Nama. And I have one more question for you all to go around, and then we'll go to the questions from the audience. We have about 30 minutes remaining. And just a reminder to everybody here, you can click on the questions in the Q&A, and you can upvote, and upvote questions that you support. So if somebody's already asked a question that you have in mind, you can click that little arrow and upvote, and we can make sure to address the most popular questions. So I have one more for everybody, and we've kind of started to get into this. Andy, you had a slide mentioning this, but just about the sensitivity with data, political sensitivity, security risks. So maps are such powerful storytelling tools, right? And decision-making tools, as we're talking about. But of course, we don't always know what that end decision or end use case will be as we're getting into. So for some examples at WHO, of course, we would love to know where every health facility is in the world, and country by country. We'd love to know the capacity and the characteristics of that health facility, and as much information as we can about it. But very understandably, very reasonably, many countries and ministries of health are reluctant or apprehensive to share that too publicly, because that might be used not for distributing vaccines or for beneficial purposes, but it can also be used maliciously in times of conflict, as Majid was pointing out in Gaza, for example. So we even see this, and Andy, you talked about population numbers. We see where using different population counts and different censuses, population estimates, can be quite political also, and sometimes a country or a Ministry of Health will really prefer to use one population number versus other estimates. And navigating that balance of this open data versus being sensitive to those very real and very justified sensitivities is a very hard balance to strike. Of course, as a analytical data person, I would love all data to be open, and we can all agree upon that. But of course, that's not the reality. So any advice or examples of walking that fine line in this data sensitivity arena? And anyone feel free to jump in first. Majid, I see you're off mute.
Yeah. This is really, Danny, very good question. We are living in a world where we have a lot of conflicts. The whole world is polarized, and we operate in a politically charged environment, and we have to be try to remove all our, or detach ourselves from all biases, and we have to reflect the data as is, to the best of our knowledge, to make sure that we pass any info product through the right people, from human rights people to the senior management to the reporting officer, just to make sure that we are using the right language with the right disclaimers. And if we are not confident about the data, we should not publish it, because it would cause huge damage. We need really to protect ourselves protect the operation, and be impartial as possible when we operate in a war zone. Everything is recorded. Everything is measured, and you might jeopardize the whole humanitarian operation if you miscalculate or misrepresent the data. You can't have any political biases because we are under the microscope. Everything is censored by the two fighting parties, and the minute you make a mistake, it will be irreversible. So my advice, you have to be really politically correct and focus more on the life-saving angle. Don't get into the politics and be factual and have a methodology behind any figure or any map you publish, because people will come after you, how you produced this map, how you came about those figures. So you have to be bulletproof. You have to be conscious about what you publish. Over.
Thank you, Majid. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there, you know, as with many things, there's no perfect answer. So I think we're all trying to find something good there. I think, you know, at one level, map data is digitization of facts on the ground, and you think that would be fairly uncontroversial, but as you mentioned, it is. It becomes controversial. I think one of the ways we think about that is to have a fairly narrow description of what the core data is, the base map data is. And I think if you think about how maps are built today, within any theme like places or buildings, there's a whole bunch of data that's attached to that. And the more data you start adding onto the map, the more chances you have of getting into things where you're wrong or controversial or private or something like that. For instance, if I know there's a medical facility, where the medical facility is, the address of it, things like that is observable by anyone. It should be fairly hard fact. If I start getting into attributes on that, do they have vaccines? Do they have these sorts of services? Now I start getting into higher and higher levels of potential uncertainty. And so I think one of the things that we're looking at is this idea of a core map data set. So there is a building here, there is a medical facility here, a stable identifier, and then let the application attach the data to that. And I think what that does is transfers to the application developer the ability to choose the most authoritative or highest reliability or most useful data and attach it. And I think it doesn't solve all the problems, but I think keeping the core data at a fairly unarguable set of basic facts is very important, but then allowing people to attach data to that through this stable identifier system. That would be our approach to it.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see, Nama.
Yeah, that's a good question. I just wanted to share that at heart, we're very careful in mapping, such such situation. So we actually do have a protocol. So we evaluate the situation, evaluate the potential risk. We'll, and then so within the organization there is a system before we make a final decision whether we begin mapping or not. We actually have to go through that process within the organization, and we take that very seriously. This is not only in a war situation. There is a whole book, and I remember lying with map kinds of thing. Map is a power. Map represents something, and I agree with Mark. But at the same time, what's being put on the map will benefit. Will not. Kinds of. There are a lot of those things, but just being aware a little bit about this will just enable us to do a better job. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Nama. Andy?
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add than what's been said, but to echo Majid's comments, I think that we're talking here about open data, but the open methods is a really powerful thing that we found, where any kind of questions about how population numbers were produced. If all the methods are open, you can say we did this. These are the data sets we used. Here they are. Here's the steps we took. You can replicate them. Here's the code. We did it together so that somebody else in your organization, in the organization that's using the data, can replicate it and dig into it. And as an academic group, we put things through peer review and get the scientific sign off as well. So all of those have really helped build confidence in those stakeholders who are using the data, that they can open these up to the world, because they can point and say, okay, if you don't agree with it, this is where it came from. Have a look, have a go yourself. And that is really, I think, is the power of open methods and data.
If I could add something on there, just to what Nama and Andy said, I think one of the things, in mapping, we focus on the data, and the problems with that is the data goes out of date, and it goes out, and the processes are suspect. And I think, as I've seen in the mapping world, more and more emphasis on higher resolution data, more recent data, more accurate data. I think what you're going to see over time is, rather than focus on the data set, the processes by which that data is built are going to become very important, because that's going to be sort of the way you know whether that data is accurate or high resolution. And I think, if data is highly volatile, then the data you have at any one time may or may not be important, because it might change. Majad made a great comment about Gaza, classic place of a lot of the things that were mapped a year ago have dramatically changed. And so the emphasis, I think, will become, as we go forward, less on the data at any point in time, and more what Nama and Andy were saying, the processes by which that data is built, I think, is going to become more important.
Yeah. And Kim, let me add one, about the timeliness and how up to date the information. I think we are living in a golden era where we are somehow shifting from static mapping to online mapping, and I think this is the power of AI, cloud-based mapping, which will allow decision makers and operational people on the ground to benefit from more up-to-date information, because once you put the whole model of data processing in a database, it's just a matter of just updating few records, and the whole end product will be ready at the tip of their hands in an hour, rather a whole day or a week to process the data. I think all those processes has been truncated in terms of time, and we can make those data sets or final products accessible and available to a wider range of audience. Over.
Thank you, Majid. And I think we're doing a nice job of answering actually some of the top questions in the chat. So for those participants here, feel free to keep upvoting, and panelists, you're also able to reply through text to any of the comments. But I think we've addressed this first one from Asha that received a lot of upvotes about, especially in a place like during experiencing conflict where data is changing quickly. Of course, it's hard to keep up, but I think, Majid, your latest point addressed that quite well. Maybe we can jump to another question from Brian, not about data freshness necessarily, but about completeness. And I know, for example, Andy, at WorldPop and Grid 3, you will publish parts of a country that you're confident in, but if there's areas that you don't have confident estimates for, you will understandably not publish that. Where sometimes with OpenStreetMap, we have the world map, but we don't always know where there's those gaps, right? Where the data is still incomplete or partially complete, but growing. And so any advice or examples on the best ways to approach this in assessing with Brian's question in the chat, how complete data might be, open data for an area, and how much we can rely on it, how reliable it is. Mark?
Yeah, tough question. And you know, the problem, of course, is, as I'm sure Brian knows, is like, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And I think there are two things I would say. One is what we have seen is that different sources give you different different coverage. And so to some extent, conflating different sources, which means you have to deduplicate those different sources, gets you to more completeness. Our buildings data set is 2.3 billion buildings, and we don't know if that's complete or not. It's probably got some false positives in there. We're for sure missing some stuff. But I think we've gotten there by conflating different things. And for instance, you know, we found OSM does a great job where the community has been engaged in map things. Government data sets are great where the government makes their open data. And then the AI models, we use one from Microsoft, one from Google. Microsoft's primarily north of the equator, Google's primarily south of the equator. And so by combining all those, you don't answer Brian's question, are you complete? But you hope to get closer to it. The other thing I'd say, sort of tying off something Majad said, is I think that maps, the best maps today are going to get built more and more by sensors and less by survey. So classically, maps have been surveying. We go out, we send someone out, whether it's a OpenStreetMap mapper or a professional surveyor, and we survey things. Now, more and more, what we're seeing is sensors feeding back information, which we use to build map data. And I think in that way, you start to very quickly find out what you're missing. If you're building roads by doing GPS traces, when you have a GPS trace going across a field, you're probably missing a road. And so I think that will be part of the answer to that, is using sensors, as Majab was saying, you know, getting feedback from the users to start to understand what you're missing. So didn't answer Brian's question of do we know, but I think that's sort of directionally where those questions are going to be answered.
Majid, do you have something to add? I see you're off mute, or any panelists, feel free to chime in here. Nama, I guess going to you, I know that HOT prioritizes areas in disaster response and prioritizes certain areas to fill in that gap in terms of OpenStreetMap. Do you have any thoughts on areas that are incomplete in OSM?
Yeah, this notion of completeness is very challenging in mapping, because there's almost infinite things on the surface of the earth, you know. So, you know, you might be interested in certain things, other people might be interested in different things. You know, there's so much to be mapped, you know. So, for example, I've seen an OpenStreetMap in some part of the world. People have mapped even trees, you know, from park. Now, I've seen it. You know, so you can go at that level of detail. That said, we do emphasize a lot in data validation. So, you know, through Tasking Manager, you know, at least to get a sense of both the quality and the coverage of the data. And then people, you know, when there is mapping, people speak, is this, you know, this part is validated. That gives us some idea, but again, it's very difficult to tell. Again, whether that's complete or not. Again, going back to my earlier point, you know, for example, if the goal is only to map road network, then probably you could think of saying, okay, this is complete or not, you know. But there might be other people that are not really interested in roads, but they are interested in something different, you know. And that's also beauty of OpenStreetMap, because, as I said before, what map is important depends upon people's context, their needs, their background. So yeah, long, you know, short answer. That's, you know, that's a little difficult.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nama. Majid?
Yeah, there's a question on wondering if these maps could be misutilized by the army or the militia in conflict zones. Usually it's not the army. Usually people or groups of people or activists from the different factions or fighting parties who defame or miscommunicate how the information is represented in a map or in a report. And usually we do not engage in those discussions because there is no value. They are purely politicized in crisis settings. However, we in OCHA, we have something called a humanitarian notification system. And basically, this is a combination of mapping the critical facilities where we try to alert the fighting parties that those facilities are protected and should not be bombarded. Facilities, internally displaced centers, warehouses, critical facilities for a humanitarian organization, warehouses for the UN. And we usually use this system, which has a geographical component, to tell the authority that we are moving from X location to Y location. Until they authorize us to do that, we will not move. And usually there is also maps that, where they categorize different zones where we can move and where we can't move. Unfortunately, there is unfortunate incidents where those facilities has been bombarded and many humanitarian actors were killed in those incidents. So it's not defaming or misutilization by the army, but there is unfortunate incidents where we loses our humanitarian personnel on the ground. Over.
Thank you, Majid. Any other thoughts on that from the team? There's a lot of questions here, so thanks everyone for submitting these. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but maybe in our last 6 minutes that we have here together, we can get to 2 more or so. I see a question from Robert Fraser Terry. There's great interest in the impacts of climate change on health. What plans are there to combine meteorological data with these open mapping tools? So expanding not just built infrastructure and populations, but also talking about natural disasters and climate change on health. Anybody want to take this one? Question from Robert?
I'll take a shot. One of the things that we think about a lot, because we have 35 organizations in Overture, and no 2 of them have exactly the same interests, right? And so there are people in all different things, and the things that a car manufacturer is interested in is not the things that a climate or environmental science person is interested in. And so one of the questions is sort of what to map. And as I mentioned, we're putting out 6 data themes today, but the UN has, I think, 14 critical data themes. So, we clearly are not covering all of them. I think the question Robert asks is really important. Meteorological data obviously is very temporal. It's something that's constantly changing and doesn't lend itself to static map. But the question of what that dynamic data or temporal data needs to be attached to on the map is a really important one. And it's one I know I've talked to some people. I think HOT has done a really good job of kind of looking backwards at humanitarian climate crises and saying what was the data that was needed to respond, and it gives sort of a roadmap of what data on the ground needs to be in the map if we're going to respond to those in a better way. So I think that's the beginning of the answer. One of the things, for instance, like we map buildings, we map roads, we map places, we map admin boundaries, which a couple of people have commented. Right now, we're not attaching stable identifiers to things like land cover, and maybe we should, right? Maybe that's a important component of mapping that we need to for some of these climate things. So I think that's an area we're looking at, but still trying to understand.
Thank you, Mark. Andy, over to you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the question about combining meteorological data, I think that's similar to Mark has said. It's there's an interoperability challenge often with different fields of study have different formats of data, different scales, and so it can take a bit of effort to get everything to line up. And yeah, in terms of, you mentioned what plans are there. I mean, for us, we see quite a lot of use of our population data sets in the climate change and health field, but it's often by academics who have the ability to bring these data sets together, big sources of data, all in different formats. So for us, yeah, we're in this, have some funds coming from Wellcome. We're talking with the DHIS2 team, who also have support from Wellcome to do climate and health resilient health systems, for us to put our data sets in a format that is more accessible and matching with those that the climate change community are using. So there are efforts going on, but it's as many of the speakers have said, 80% of the work sometimes is mangling together and harmonizing different types of data rather than the cool running a statistical model. It's that's part of the challenges. Oh yeah.
Thank you, Andy. And Nama, before I go to you, I'll just mention quickly that our GIS center at WHO, we do provide a lot of trainings on technical tools. So that note Andy mentioned about access. So for any participants there who are interested in learning to access these open data sources, we provide a lot of technical training, both in person and virtually. And we would be more than happy, we'd be delighted to help you learn to utilize these open data sources. Nama, over to you.
Cam, I just wanted to respond to two questions. One is very straightforward. Somebody's asking, how can I learn more about OpenStreetMapping? So if I don't know where you are based in, if you're in one of our hub regions, please get in touch with our hub colleagues or anybody from HUT or even the larger OSM community. There's a lot of resources and everybody's willing to help actually. So yeah, just keep in touch. And there's another question, Cam, that's really important. Somebody has asked, so if everybody's editing, making map in OSM, then how do you determine authenticity? That's, yeah, people might get confused when it's chaos when everybody's mapping. So that's a good question, and we receive that question every time we talk about OpenStreetMap. So we need to think slightly differently about this phenomena. So this is driven by a different philosophy. So the idea is that when there is a map, somebody maps, and the expectation is that there are other mappers in the area who do have some local knowledge, and they will look into this map and then improve it. So that's the idea. Because the system is open, if there are errors, and other people can improve it, and the whole map becomes better incrementally, but the condition is that we need to have people. Otherwise, if there is somebody maps something wrong, if there are no other individuals looking into it or improving, it's possible that will stay there for some time. So that's the idea. That's why we need more people, particularly people with local knowledge, to expand the coverage of the map, to improve the quality of the data. So it's different. No map is perfect, as Mark said at the beginning. Even in a traditional map, if there are errors, and I've seen maps with mistakes, but you cannot improve it. Mm-hmm. Because that's not open. So yeah, that's my quick response to that question. Cam, over to you again.
Thank you, Nama. And I think that's a nice thought to close on, is that in the end, the OSM project is the same as WHO's mission, is people-centered, and it's all about people at the end of the day. So we're at time, and I just want to thank you all, our panelists and all of our attendees. Thanks for being here. Hope this conversation was useful to you all. And please be in touch with us at the GIS Center. Hope to see you again at a future training or a knowledge series. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.